Well, hi, my name is Bey Logan, and welcome to the Dragon Dynasty DVD release of the Kung Fu classic, Fist of Legend. And I think every movie we do on the label, I always describe as a Kung Fu classic, but I think the fans genuinely feel that Fist of Legend is a masterpiece of martial arts cinema and one of the really great films in the canon of Jet Li. Here's the Golden Harvest logo. A lot of the interior work was done at the late lamented Golden Harvest Studios in Hong Kong. It's one of the great films from the latter era of Golden Harvest. Now, this film is like a reworking of a classic Bruce Lee movie, Fist of Fury, which is known in the United States as The Chinese Connection. The Chinese title of the movie is Zheng Mo Mun, and it means Mun is a door, and Zheng is excellent, and Mo is martial. So it's the doorway to excellence in the martial arts. And this movie is Zheng Mo Ying Hong, Fist of Legend, Zheng Mo Ying Hong. Basically, Ying Hong is hero, so it's hero of Zheng Mo, hero of the door, coming through the doorway of martial arts. And the character in the movie, the main character of the film, played by Jet Li, Chen Zhen, was a real student of a real-life martial arts master called Ho Yun-ja, Fot Yun-ga. And you may have seen, confusingly enough, Jet Li play the character Ho Yun-ja in a later movie, Fearless. But in this film is very much re-examining and reworking the themes and the ideas and the structure of the earlier Bruce Lee movie. So this movie shot in 1994, and I think arguably the end of that great cycle of reworked kung fu movies that began with Once Upon a Time in China, which of course also starred Jet Li. Now, the film itself, the reason they were able to actually go and remake a Bruce Lee movie was the fact that the characters were historical. So it was based on actual historical people, and so they did not have to go back and do any kind of further deal with the screenwriters or the producers of the original movie. They had to be a little careful about using the title Fist of Fury, which is why this is Fist of Legend. And in fact, Stephen Chow did a movie called Fist of Fury 1991, and Golden Harvest actually sued him for doing that because they copyrighted the name Fist of Fury. So the opening scene here, this is actually shot in Tianjin in China. This is, in fact, the Tianjin Foreign Studies University. But in the context of the film, we're in Japan, and it's 1937. And Tianjin, or Tianjin, is not far from Beijing and very similar in its history to Shanghai. It was a town or a city that had lots of foreign concessions. It was a treaty port, and therefore there's a lot of similar architecture to Shanghai, so it makes a good double for... Here it's being used to double Japan. Later in the movie, the same city is used to double Shanghai. And when we come into the interior is actually the old Golden Harvest Studios on Hammer Hill Road in Hong Kong. And here is the hero of our movie, the martial arts idol Jet Li, Li Lianjie, who is playing Chen Zhen. And it's amazing the youthfulness of Chinese men. I mean, here he is in his 30s, late 30s, I think, at the time the movie was made, and playing a student, and nobody really blinks an eye. And our lovely leading lady, Shinobu Nakayama, who is an actress basically doing monster movies in Japan. She's in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla and the greatly titled Gamera Giant Monster Midair Showdown. Now we have the arrival of these Japanese heavies, actually played by Hong Kong stuntmen, and the gentleman, the taller of the gentlemen, the leader of the pack, is Lei Tatchui, who was later the assistant action director on The Matrix and worked as action director for Andrew Lau on Infernal Affairs 2 and Confessions of Pain. And like he's got like a right-hand man who comes marching in with him. Obviously they're looking for guys who are passable as Japanese heavies, even though they're Chinese stuntmen. This guy on the left there we see coming in to back him up is Sam Wong Chun, who actually shows up later in the movie as well. This is kind of a period in Japan when in the universities there was a rise of the militant, that's the guy to the immediate right of our main heavy there, is Sam Wong. So this was a time when there was really a rise in universities in Japan of militarism, of right-wingers. So this was something in keeping with the politics of the time. This sequence here, Gordon Chan admits, part of it was influenced by a fight sequence in the Akira Kurosawa classic Redbeard. So he had like certain moves that they were using that were kind of used by Toshiro Mifune in a fight in that film. It was originally planned by the action director, the great Yuen Woo-ping, to do breakaways and stuff with wires. And Gordon Chan made a very smart decision to keep this film very much grounded. That movement there with the jaw being dislocated, that's right out of Redbeard. And so you can see the ceiling. The ceiling is very visible. Normally on Hong Kong action films, you can't see the ceiling because they need that space to put the wires so the actors can fly around and do exaggerated jumping kicks. So we're not going to do that on this set, and also the props are very solid. And here's Yasuaki Kurata, Shoji Kurata, veteran Japanese actor who really found his greatest success working in Hong Kong films. And he was in such films as Legend of a Fighter, the great Shaw Brothers classic Heroes of the East, which we have out on Dragon Dynasty. Still very much with us, very alive and literally kicking. He's running a stunt school in Tokyo. He's a contemporary of Bruce Lee. So I think Kurata-san is very much like Bruce Lee would be were he alive and with us today. And he started his career at Shaw Brothers in a movie called The Angry Guest, which was a sequel to Chong Jit's earlier Duel of Fists, and then went on to make a film called Four Riders, which is unusual. It's a Korean War-themed Chinese action film. And he worked with Bruce Lee at one removed in the film Fist of Unicorn, which was a film starring Bruce Lee's friend Unicorn Chan, Sugelan. And Bruce was a kind of a part-time choreographer on the movie. But Bruce was a friend of Kurata-san, certainly wanted to use him in a movie, but they never got to do so. It would be very interesting to see what kind of a matchup you would have had for these guys. And Kurata-san introduced the Japanese actors seen in the movie, including Shinobu Nakayama, who we see here. Kind of taking a break from this era of her career, she was actually doing these movies with Godzilla and the Giant Monster Midair Showdown with Gamera, all these kind of monster movies. Later, she was in more artistic films, usually in supporting roles. She was in a reworking of the Japanese classic The Story of Genji in 2001. And she's the younger sister of another actress, Miho Nakayama, who was in one of the latter Zatoichi films with Shintaro Katsu, and also in the hit TV series Sleeping Forest. And also I think Bebop High School, which was like a cult movie of its era. So all the actors, the Japanese actors, were cast by on the recommendation of Kurata-san, who also came in and plays a fantastic role in the film. One very reminiscent of an earlier part he played in the seasonal film Legend of a Fighter. Legend of a Fighter told the story of Ho Yun-ja, Fot Yun-gap, who is the teacher of Chen Jun, the character Jet Li plays in this movie, and of course his death is which we just heard about in the story, kind of starts the story rolling. So here we are, leaving the interior studio at Golden Harvest, coming back out. When we come back outside again with Jet Li and Ms. Nakayama, here we are back on the streets of Tintin. And this is meant to be Tokyo, and the kind of the quick shots here, because obviously they haven't got a huge budget to rebuild like downtown Tokyo. See the Japanese militarists sending out the rise of the military power in this period. Now this is supposedly the docks, I presume, in Tokyo. It's actually in Hong Kong at Saiwan-ho, which is a Hong Kong dock. And so you have a mix of Chinese playing Japanese and local Westerners, Western extras hired in Hong Kong for these scenes. And actually earlier in Heroes of the East, they had done a sequence very similar with a boat and everything, and it was actually shot, they actually flew to Japan. For this movie, even though the opening is in Japan, they never flew there to shoot in Japan, and even though the bulk of the movie is set in Shanghai, the production never actually went to Shanghai to film. It was all shot either in the backlot at Golden Harvest or at Tianjin in China itself. Jet himself, I think, really at the height of his powers in this movie. Ironically, this was not the most successful of the Jet Li movies at the Asian box office, but I think it absolutely stood the test of time. And I think if you actually polled most of the fans of Jet Li, or indeed fans of Kung Fu cinema, they would actually have this stand this up there as one of his great movies. And what I like about it is it shows him physically at the height of his prowess. He's really using a limited amount of doubles and wires and special effects, and also he delivers a very human performance. I mean, particularly in his relationship with the girl that we see here. The Japanese, in this stage of the movie, you're really seeing the negative side, which is the rise of the military right in Tokyo. Later in the film, Gordon Chan goes to great lengths to give more balanced view, to not be so jingoistic. This is a Japanese language newspaper, and it's talking about the challenge match between Ho Yun-ja, aka Fot Yun-gap, and a Japanese challenger. And this is on the boat. Again, this is at Saiwan-ho, as Chen Jun is actually making the journey back, the long journey back to Shanghai. Exciting era. Shanghai in this era. I mean, our company right now is making a movie called Shanghai. So the excitement of this era is very much in my mind. This is the Shanghai Bund, Shanghai Tan, but actually it's in Tianjin, and the streets and the outfit that Jet is wearing is one that would be worn by a Japanese student, hence the fact that the rickshaw puller kind of mistakes him for a Japanese. If you look at the rickshaw puller, he's got actually two Chinese characters on his waistcoat, which is Chongying, which is presumably the name of the rickshaw company. Of course, in the Bruce Lee movie, we see Bruce. This is where the Bruce Lee movie begins. This is where Fist of Fury begins, with Bruce Lee arriving back from studying wearing a white suit, which is interesting because white is the color of death, so he's already dressed for a funeral. And we see Jet arriving, and he's wearing black. But this is the point. We did the kind of prequel, or the kind of the setting up of this scene of him studying in Japan. That's nowhere present in the Bruce Lee version. And we see at the last of the shot, there's like a cart going by with the Watsons on the side of it, which is a famous kind of chemist store in Hong Kong and still very much active to this day. Watson's, your personal store. Now, when we get outside the main entrance, you see the sign there for Jeng Mo Mun, and there's a white lantern, and the white lantern has the character Dean on the side of it. The white lantern hanging outside indicates that somebody has died. In this case, it's Fo Yun Gap, Ho Yun Jia. And white is color of death in Chinese culture. So at a Chinese wedding, the bride wearing white would be considered an awful omen. So you actually brides wear red, which is an auspicious color for a Chinese wedding. So there we go. Beautiful production design by Horace Ma. By the way, I love the doorway there. Here we are in the interior at Golden Harvest. Very much, some of the shots very influenced, I think, by the Paul Schrader film Mishima, which Yasuaki Kurata had been in. This is a sequence here where Chin Su-ho, the gentleman with the white bandana, who is playing the son of the late Ho Yun-ja, is going to have a challenge match. This is what they call taekwon, which is like you kick the school. Taek is kick and gwon is mogun is martial arts school. So what's happened is after the death of Fo Yun-gap, there's a feeling that the school will no longer be strong enough to maintain its place in the martial arts world. So this rather kind of ill-tempered martial arts master has come to challenge the son to see if he is up to the standard of the of his father and teacher. Very traditional. You actually see in the movie Prodigal Son by Gajai, Sammo Hung's classic movie about Wing Chun. In the end, Yuen Bu, whose teacher, not his father, his teacher's been killed, and he's wearing very similar sackcloth and ashes. So this is a very traditional funeral where you see Paul Linda Lee wearing it at the funeral of Bruce Lee. And so it's particularly poignant that he's having to fight for the honor of the school, and the father's, barely passed away. Chin Su-ho, great-looking guy, terrific martial artist. He was one of the last generation of people who were meant to be stars at Shaw Brothers studio, but he never quite made it to the top rank. He's in movies like Mr. Vampire, Blonde Fury, and mystery to me why he wasn't a bigger star. The older gentleman we saw just then, who plays like the kind of the elder brother of the school, like the uncle figure, one of the older students at the school, is who's coming in now in the middle of the frame, Paul Chen Pui, and he's actually the brother of or half brother of the old kung fu movie star David Chang, Gung Dai Wai, and he's also the brother of the director Derek Yi Dong-sing, and he won Best Supporting Actor for 2 times actually, Paul Chen, for his performances in 2 of his brother's films, The Lunatics and C'est la vie mon chéri. So a very talented family. You've got like 2 great actors and 1 great director. Derek Yi himself had formerly been a kung fu movie star at Shaw Brothers. So this is kind of an interesting point that Paul Chen's character is saying that because Jet Li was not direct family member, because Chen Zhen is not a family member of the Fok family, he shouldn't be wearing the funeral garb, because according to Chinese tradition, only direct members of the family, blood relatives, should be wearing this. That photograph there, or rather a drawing of the one famous photograph of Fo Yun-gap, which hangs in every branch of Jeng Mo Mun, or the Jingwu Academy. In Cantonese it's Jeng Mo Mun, and in Mandarin Jingwu Men. And around the world, at every one of those schools, there's actually that photograph hanging. This character is Yan, which means tolerance, and obviously it's drawn by Fo Yun-gap to kind of encourage the students not to fight needlessly, which makes what happens next all the more powerful. The next moment when Jet Li or Chen Zhen has obviously realized that you've reached the point when tolerance, when Yan no longer applies. Should mention the music for the film. The original score for the film was by Joseph Koo, and I think we're going to have separate tracks on here with the original score. Joseph Koo, as far as I can ascertain, was the only person who worked on this movie and on the original Bruce Lee film Fist of Fury. He did the music for both films, and in both cases a wonderful score. I mean, Steve Edwards was like the go-to guy for our company in terms of finding somebody to rescore these films for the international market, and he does a very good job of blending Eastern and Western themes. And I think that Joseph Koo is a real past master at scoring Hong Kong films as well. So you have a great choice of the music for the films. And the film itself, peopled by a lot of the supporting actors are TVB actors. TVB is the biggest TV station in Hong Kong. Was kind of, I guess, Shaw Brothers evolved into TVB because they have the same owner, Run Shaw. And as Shaw Brothers' fortunes as a movie studio declined, the TV came into its own. Now here at the police station, which is another interior at Golden Harvest, that's Yun Chen-yan, who is the brother of Yuen Woo-ping, who is the action director of the film. He's the equivalent of the character played by the director Lo Wei in the original Fist of Fury. And he's also one of the choreographers on the movie, Yun Chen-yan, and also choreographed both of the Charlie's Angels films, in which he also appears, and he choreographed some of the fights for Daredevil as well. The structure of the film, very much like Fist of Fury, that Chen Jun finds out that his master's been murdered and immediately goes to the Japanese dojo looking for some payback. And again, let's hear it for Horace Mara and the production design. This is like the most wonderful shots, the way the dojo has been laid out for this particular... Dojo is the Japanese name for a martial arts school. Kenshi Tanigaki there, who's Donnie Yen's main stunt guy. You can see him actually playing a role on camera in our release of the movie Killzone. Chan Hing-fai, the gentleman there, the tallest of the other students, the guy holding the wooden sword, who's going to kind of really lead the attack against Jet. He's a prominent TVB actor, not really a movie performer as much, but working on TV. Now, in terms of his style, you can't fault Jet Li in terms of martial artistry, but dude, white socks with a black suit, I don't know whether that's ever going to catch on, but maybe it was the thing in 1994 or back in 1937 when the movie is set. But this is fantastic to see the real Jet Li in action. Again, Gordon Chan had made this decision that he wasn't going to have a lot of wires, a lot of jumping, so you got this low you often see the ceiling in shots, which gives a sense, I think, of a reality of the energy being contained within these four walls and a roof. And you also get to see Jet really kind of fighting in a grounded way, which is something that we don't always see in his movies, because he also does more the wire fu kind of action. And I think audiences in the West, I think, much more like this with a little bit of wire enhancement, and they really prefer the more grounded martial arts action. So this, I think, one of the great fights of Jet Li's career, when he really gets to cut loose like this. And you notice, like, later in the fight, there's a scene when one of the guys comes up behind him and he does this kind of really vicious crotch grab. A lot of the moves are very reminiscent, by the way, of some of the Bruce Lee movies. It's kind of a reworking of the Bruce Lee moves from the Fist of Fury, the Fist of Fury version of this fight. But it's closing in now. This guy gets grabbed as Sam Wong, who was in the opening scene. So I guess Sam was on the same boat as Chen Jun. Kind of a bit of a stretch, but I guess aren't that many Japanese-looking stunt guys. Channing Fai, not really a stunt guy or a martial artist, so full power to him for taking a whack from the great Jet Li. Here's the guy who's meant to have killed Fok Yun Gap, and the actor's name is Jackson Lau Hok Yin. He's actually from Taiwan. He's not a martial artist per se, so again, full credit to Yuen Woo-ping for making him look as effective as he does. You also may have seen him in the Jackie Chan film First Strike, and also in the Stanley Tong movie China Strike Force. But I met him on the set when he was in Australia doing First Strike. Speaks good English. I'm not really sure what happened to him. I mean, he had done a number of high-profile films. I think he went back to Taiwan and was doing TV work, TV presenting, that kind of thing. So really making an effort to juxtapose the more solid Japanese karate style and the slightly softer stylization. Variants of this pose are usually the artwork for the DVDs and posters for this movie. And what Jet has, what the character Chen Jun applies in his fights is this sense of distance, which is superior to that of his opponents. He uses distance as a weapon. It's not that he's faster or stronger than the opponent is, but he has a better understanding of distance. So most of the fights begin at striking range, kicking, punching range, as he gets the measure of the opponent. And then here, he's constantly closing the distance and getting into a range where the opponent is uncomfortable and unfamiliar. And so this kind of gives him an advantage. And in subsequent fights in the film, you see him apply the same strategy. And there's an idea that Chen Jun has learned from Fot Yun Gap, has learned the ways of Zheng Momun, but he's applying Bruce Lee's principle, basically absorb what is useful, reject what is useless, and create what is specifically your own. And he's in the status now, in this movie, where he's creating a style that is specifically his own. So the purpose of this scene really is to establish, Chen Jun is establishing absolutely in a hands-on manner that this is not a guy who could anyway have defeated Fot Yun Gap in a fair fight. Therefore, there must have been some other agent involved that caused the death of the teacher. And I really feel that every aspect of this film, it was a worthy send-off for that cycle of kung fu cinema, because every aspect of it is terrific. And some of the Japanese and various soldiers are seen carrying Enfield rifles in some of these cutaway shots, which is unusual because they would have been actually carrying Japanese rifles, which are of another vintage. They would not have been carrying Lee Enfields. I think the costuming of some of the people here is fantastic. I mean, there's the shot, there's the actors, the guys with the Lee Enfield. Look at the red Cheung Sam on that guy in the background there. That's some wild and wacky look. So these big shots, wider shots here, are all in Tianjin. And we have the arrival of, this is Billy Chow Bele, Canadian-born kickboxer turned actor, who was discovered by Sammo Hung, has a terrific role in the movie. And this is Toshimichi Takahashi, the gentleman with the beard. He's actually a veteran of the Kamen Rider, the Kamen Masked Rider series. These are kind of like superhero-y films, TV series that are done in Japan. So you get the first stare down between these guys. Of course, Billy Chow, as always, on camera, the toughest dude on the block. In person, the nicest guy you could ever hope to meet. And I think we have an interview with him elsewhere on the DVD, so you can, ascertain that for yourself. So Yun Chen Yan, actually, I think great, very right, often plays a wacky Taoist master like he did in the film Tai Chi Master. But here he's getting a more comedic role, and he's a very good comedy actor. This grave, this is actually the first time we see the grave of Fot Yun Gap, and it's an interior at Golden Harvest. Later, we actually have another shot of the gravestone. It's a very different kind of location. I remember meeting the guy that played the doctor. He was just the white guy you see here. He was just some fellow living in Hong Kong. I think he was in another movie at Golden Harvest, Shannon Lee film called Enter the Eagles. I think I met him on the set of that, and he said he just came, they had no idea what he was going to do till he turned up on the day, and they said, guess what? You're playing a doctor. And that's happened to me plenty of times. And full credit to Chen Jun. He really is a master of all trades. He's a kick-ass martial artist. At the beginning of the movie, we see he's studying engineering in Japan, and now he's doing kind of, I guess he's doing a post-mortem examination. I would have no idea how to find the liver or remove the liver of a corpse. But obviously, Chen Jun has had a very wide education in Tokyo, and he knows how to do any number of useful things. This is like in the Bruce Lee movie. There's a scene in the rain when Chen Jun breaks down at the graveside of the teacher and has to be kind of bashed over the head with a spade. So this is kind of a funny, I guess it's kind of riff on that, because this is obviously a much more mannered Chen Jun. Jet Li's playing, and he says, if you don't want me to take out the liver, hit me on the head with this, which is kind of a reference to what happens in the earlier film. The original elder brother figure, played by Paul Chen here, was played by Tien Feng, Tien Feng, a Taiwanese actor in the original movie. Gordon Chan told me that's actually the liver. If anyone was worried, this is the liver of an animal that was bought from a butcher's shop. There was no actual human vivisection to create the scene. I'm not quite sure about this in terms of 1937, if this kind of forensic CSI level technology existed. But it's important for the film for us to know that Chen is not a madman, that he actually has good reason, and he actually does some detective work in this. Whereas Bruce basically just goes off and kind of kills and actually kind of accidentally finds out who the murderers are. Here, there's actually some detective work involved, so it's kind of a more mannered kind of character. In the original film, the reason behind the death of Fot Yun Gap was that he was poisoned. And here we have exactly the same cause, but the story behind it, the backstory to the poisoning, is a little different. In the Fist of Fury movie, the cook was Japanese in disguise who wants to poison Fot Yun Gap. And in this movie, it's the cook has actually been blackmailed into doing so, or somehow conjoined into, and he didn't realize he was going to kill the master. He just thought he was going to debilitate him for the match. And here is the cook, who's played by Wong Sun, whose nickname is Mao Sok. He's called Mao Sok because he was in a series of TV series, HK 85, 86, 87. Each year they had it, and it was sketches about life in Hong Kong. He was born, Wong Sun was born in 1926, died in 1999. His other movies at Golden Harvest include Games Gamblers Play, which is an early comedy from John Woo. He was also in Fist of Unicorn, which I mentioned earlier, the movie that Bruce Lee co-choreographed starring Unicorn Chan. And he also has a supporting role around about this time in the Jackie Chan film Drunken Master 2. I would argue that these are the two last great classic films of 90s Kung Fu, of the early 90s Kung Fu cycle, Fist of Legend and Drunken Master 2. And the last film of Wong Sun before he was passing was Chinese Torture Chamber 2. I think it would have been better if he'd stopped after this one and gone out on a high note. But anyway, we capture this fine performance here. Very strong comedic actor, and I think this is actually the biggest role he was ever given in a film. Now, at the beginning of the Chinese version of the movie, you actually get like a card coming up saying that that the film is based on real facts that have been changed, have been fictionalized for the purposes of the movie. This is kind of important because later, when Jet Li played the character Ho Yun Jia, or Fot Yun Gap, in Fearless, actually the descendant of Fot Yun Gap tried to sue them for defamation, which I think was a bit of a reach. Here you see kind of westernized training method of Chen Zhen, and really kind of bringing in the ideas of a Bruce Lee character, somebody who's kind of modernizing martial arts training. Wire assisted on the single arm pull up. That's one of the few definite uses of a wire in the film. And it's a problem because he's obviously superior to Chin Siu Ho, and there's more of the backstory of Chin Siu Ho has been cut even from the Chinese version. We'll talk about that some more as to why he hasn't quite reached the level. I love this, and especially with the music in both versions of the score. This is a terrific sequence, and if you love real Chinese martial arts the way I do, it's great seeing this crisp movement from Jet Li, a much more southern style than we're used to seeing from him when he's doing his more wushu-esque films. And here really expounding a Bruce Lee-style philosophy. And I think it's wonderful the way that Gordon Chan went back to the Bruce Lee film, went back to Bruce Lee as an icon, and deconstructed all the elements that we know and love about Bruce Lee and kind of restructured them in this film. But he's not copying, he's doing it in a new and exciting way. There have been all these films after the death of Bruce Lee, Fist of Fury 2 and 3, starring Bruce Lai, Ho Jung-do, who was like a Bruce Lee impersonator, where they just kind of slavishly copied everything that was in the original movie, and with him with the nunchaku, the Song Ji Quan, and all these elements kind of just to kind of con the market. You know, Bruce Lee had not died. He's still making films. Now, this I take issue at, being a Hong Kong stylist that I am, and our Sei Ping Ma. There's a gag when Jet Li says, "What's that Sei Ping Ma?" which is like 4 steps horse. It's more like Sei Ma. Sei Ma is like dead horse, so it's a play on the word Sei, which is 4 in Cantonese and also can mean death. I think there was some benefit to stance training, but it's definitely something that Bruce Lee had said. This is right out of Way of the Dragon, when Bruce kicked Wu Ngan behind the restaurant. And it's great. No one is as good at Yuen Woo-ping at every style of action, but in showing power on screen. Him and Sammo Hung are really up there. Now we're on the Wild and Wonderful. This is actually on the backlot at Golden Harvest. The Wild and Wonderful Back Streets. And the name here is Hui Hong, the name there that you saw with the red light. And the way it's kind of drawn would indicate that she's actually a lady of easy virtue. Or a hooker, can I say that? She's a hooker. Ada Choi is the actress, Choi Si-fan. Her nickname is Cha Siu Fan, because Cha Siu Fan is pork and rice. So her real name is Choi Siu Fan, and the nickname is Cha Siu Fan. Miss Hong Kong runner-up, and a very committed Christian lady, and primarily a TVB actress, big star on TVB. Now, in the Taiwanese version, which is the only long, full version of the film, we see them taking opium. And this explains why Chin Soo-ho's character has been diverted from his true path by his love for this woman, who's a kind of a fallen woman, and by the fact that they're taking opium, which is very common in the era. And we keep going back much more than in the... The original Fist of Fury, they did cut away to conversations between the Japanese, but it was pretty much one note, kill the Chinese, kill the Chinese. What Gordon Chan does here is he actually shows the differences of opinion of the colouring between the Japanese, which I think is a much more accurate reflection. I don't think that any one nation is completely behind one particular political movement. You might have a certain shift during a period of time, but you'll always have dissenting voices. So here you have, within the structure of this scene, Billy Chow's character, who is obviously the guy who's stepping up and saying, we Japanese deserve to create this Asian zone of prosperity, which means we're going to subjugate all the other Asian races. And you have like the ambassador who's kind of trying to find some kind of way to deal with things more politically and diplomatically, and the fallen warrior who is, been disgraced, has found out that they poisoned the guy that he defeated, and so it's the different reactions to the same events, and it humanizes them in a way that a lot of the more jingoistic films, including Fist of Fury, failed to do. What's ironic about it is that Bruce Lee's fighting style on camera, his cinematic action, owed a lot more to Japanese cinema, to the Chanbara samurai films, than to the Hong Kong movies that were prevalent at that time. And he used a Japanese cinematographer, and he had a great respect for Japanese martial art and took the best from everywhere that he could find. But I think he really correctly judged the view of the Hong Kong people, that they still had great resentment towards the Japanese because of the occupation from 1940 to 45, and therefore he played to that with Fist of Fury to great effect. By the time this movie was made, times had changed, so you had to kind of present a more balanced view of the Japanese people. But this film, Fist of Fury itself, was a big hit in Japan, and this movie also greatly regarded by the Japanese market. Jet Li was one of the action stars who really worked in Japan. Not all of the Hong Kong stars do break the Japanese market. This is in late night training. Again, all at this wonderfully constructed interior set up at Golden Harvest. You see there's the westernized dress and westernized training style of Jet Li, and under there he's got the Bruce Lee tank top, the Way of the Dragon tank top under his shirt, but I don't think Jet quite has that same style of physique, so he didn't ever just wear the tank top. This is very much the Shanghai of the era. The balance on the left, you have the guzhong, on the right, the xizhong. Guzhong is like the old style clothing, xizhong is modern style, and it's right, the old and the new clashing in a way, because Paul Chun's character represents tradition and family the traditional family hierarchy, and Jet's coming in and saying, no, we have to come up with new ways if we're going to prosper in this new world, and if we're going to overcome the challenge of the modern age, let alone the Japanese, we have to adapt, we have to change. And so, at the same time, there's the problem that he is not the successor to Fot Yun Gap, to Ho Yun Jia. The son is, and yet he is like obviously the shining star of Zheng Momun. And that's what I like about this movie, is the character of Jet. There's all this kind of nuance. And the fade out there, relatively unusual for films in this era. Often it was just a straight cut. And here's Jet out jogging on the streets of Tianjin. If you actually look at the scenes when we see cars, this is actually Tianjin doubling for Shanghai. You see some of the cars on the street, not necessarily in this shot, but the cars are actually slightly out of period. Interesting about Tianjin, where the film was shot, there is actually a memorial there for Fot Yun Gap, for Ho Yun Jia, and somewhere he used to live. And this actually, if they had had the no dogs or Chinese scene when Bruce is trying to get into the park on the Bund, that's where it would have been, but they decided not to do that with Jet Li. Now the body here, and the sign on it is Satyanche Tin Lei Bat Yong. Satyanche is a murderer, Tin Lei Bat Yong, heaven will not allow, and then signed Chen Jun. So they're grabbing their Japanese sword, the katana, and marching out to take revenge. I didn't actually get to talk to Gordon about it. I just was watching the movie again and was struck by similarities of some of the imagery of the biopic that Paul Schrader directed of the life of Yukio Mishima, which actually Kurata-san was in. And I think that there is a lot of the similar imagery between the films. I need to go back and look at it again. I want to talk to Gordon about it. But I absolutely felt that. Now, this lady here, who's like the senior big sister of the school, Tam Suk-moy, a.k.a. Carol Tam, TVB actress, never really done much in the way of film. She's in Tiger Cage 3, that was the one that didn't have Donnie Yen, and Red Wolf, both of those for Yuen Woo-ping, and in the wonderful Bio-Zombie by Wilson Yip, who also directed Killzone, Dragon Tiger Gate, and Flashpoint. You might have noticed earlier that, or you'll notice in a moment when we see him again, Chin Soo-ho wearing the black armband. That is for mourning. So you wear white for the funeral and subsequently the black armband for a specific amount of time because he's in mourning for his father. The other girl there on the left with the pigtails is Wallace Pang Chi-chung. Retired now. She was a TVB actress on the famous TV show Jan Cheng, and now married to a wealthy guy and retired from the industry. The one thing I could never understand about Fist of Fury was if you look at the beginning of the Bruce Lee movie, Bruce goes in and knocks 7 kinds of hell out of all the Japanese at the Japanese dojo. And then, very shortly thereafter, those same Japanese turn up at the martial arts school at Jingmomun, and they beat 7 kinds of hell out of the Chinese. So, seeing as all of these guys are also the students of Fot Yun Gap or Ho Yan Jia, why are they not better at fighting? And I can never get that in Fist of Fury. As a plot point, I understood why they wanted to have it like that. But and of course, what the kind of the time frame was that Bruce was having his encounter at the sign saying no dogs or Chinese allowed at the same time as that was happening. By the way, you look at the pole here that Chin Soo-ho is holding, is very springy. The reason for that is that in the fight shots, it's actually a rubber pole. It's kind of a hard core of plastic with like foam around it, and those are the poles they would use for these kind of sequences, for safety and for speed. And then in the tighter shots, it's actually a real wooden pole to get more convincing. So here everybody gets to have a bit of a throwdown as they're protecting the shrine of Fot Yun Gap. So Bruce. So if we'd actually had that scene, which I guess they didn't want to do, of Jet trying to get into the park on the Bund, this is where that would have gone. This would explain why he was not present. But as far as I know, they never shot that scene and decided against actually recreating it. So this is something a little bit of a reach. Japanese steel is amazing, and I think that it's the strongest swords ever known to man. So definitely, I think that the Chinese weapons would have a hard time standing up against strikes from a katana. Chin Soo-ho, an amazing martial artist in his own right. He actually started off at Shaw's. He was in the movie Two Champions of Shaolin, and that was actually sampled by the Chemical Brothers and turned into a remix into the MTV for their song Get Yourself High. Check it out now on YouTube. It's really cool. But you look at Chin Soo-ho here and you really wonder why this good-looking guy never actually got a shot never became a star. There was many attempts to launch him as a star. For some reason, the public never accepted him on the A-list. Guy on the left there in the brown is Wong Wah-wo, character in Hong Kong. He's in the Johnny To films PTU, Exiled, etc. And he was TVB actor as well. Most of the supporting cast here, they should have got maybe they got a job lot from TVB. I always wonder when the gun was fired by, if you go back and look, I always thought that it was like a Clouseau moment that a bird had fallen, but it's actually some masonry from the ceiling that shook loose when he fires the gun. This was kind of the badge of office. Very few people carried guns apart from the military and apart from the police at this time. And so this is like the badge of office of the officer. So the timing of this is that the whole fight finishes by the time Chen Jun comes back from his jogging. And that incidentally, now, I mean, it's the standard part of the training regimen of any serious martial artist, probably to do some kind of cardio. But in the time, in like 1937, this is revolutionary to go out and be jogging on the street, as Chen Jun is. So we're constantly seeing that he's ahead of the curve in terms of martial arts training. The guns, the handgun's very period. Now this is the police station. Exterior is in Tianjin. So the sign that said Chung Wu Kui, Wu means Shanghai. Interior of the jail is actually at Golden Harvest. We get this brief shot here of Chen Jun behind bars. So that's on the back lot. Just get this kind of reaction shot. Then we're exterior. This is the court building. Is actually, I think it's a bank building in Tianjin. And then back to the interior, which is at the Golden Harvest Studios. And wonderful costume design. That bright orange there on Chin Soo-ho certainly catches the eye. juxtapose the color of the Chinese witnesses, the people from the martial arts school, the Chinese martial arts school, with the all white that the Japanese are wearing on the other side of the courtroom. I also think the judge in this looked like this is something that nobody in America will get, but there was a very popular TV comedy show in England called Allo Allo about French resistance against the Germans in World War II. That's Wong Wong-Wo, by the way, right at the beginning, giving the evidence there. And I think that the judge looks like Gordon Kay, who was the lead character in Allo Allo. So I don't know if you get the BBC comedy shows in the States, but anybody English will know who I mean because it was a popular show. And this has got a nice comedic touch, and I think Gordon made very good choices. He realized if you just have a film about, somebody's teacher dies, and you just do that like they used to do in the 70s and the 80s, the whole movie's about revenge and bloodletting with no play to comedic sensibility or, kind of more sensitive feelings. Audiences wouldn't really, the modern audience of 1994 would not accept that. You had to have more texture to the film. And so you have these nice comedic moments and also this relationship, which we're about to see, which is obviously taken from the woman's side. This is quite a leap forward for 1937, that the woman kind of takes the relationship a jump forward by coming to the rescue of Chen Zhen and implying that they have an intimate relationship and that they're engaged or they're married or they have this relationship. And this would be really quite it's kind of anachronistic. It's unlikely this would actually happen, but in the movie it's quite a nice beat. Hey, check out how camp is this usher, the dude they have bringing the Japanese lady in there. He has his moment and he plays it to the hilt. So here's Shinobu Nakayama again coming in to give her testimony. And I think she's a wonderful actress, very sweet and totally suitable to the role, because you need somebody who obviously, for the conventions of the genre, and a beautiful-looking Japanese lady who's going to come in. But you also need somebody who's got some strength about her, because here is a girl who is going against her family, even going against her nation for the man she loves, and then suffers ridicule and racial discrimination in Shanghai, and really stands up for all of that. And right till the very end, when, because she loves him, she steps away to let him go to fight, maybe to his death. So not the typical one-note, wallflower that you sometimes see in kung fu movies. And again, full respect to Gordon Chan for making the choices that he's made in the film to kind of embrace all the conventions of kung fu cinema and try to transcend them and try to bring in some of the things that people liked about his other movies, like Beast Cops. I mean, Gordon's done successful films in almost every genre, from romantic comedy to horror films to crime thrillers. Probably best known for the crime thrillers. But here, delivering a terrific movie for Jet Li, as he says, when the movie came out, it wasn't a massive success. But Jet Li said to Gordon Chan, I'm so glad we made the film because it's one of my best movies. At the end, the guy says, the judge says he has to go to a cricket match. I think he must be the umpire. I can't imagine him bowling very fast. But that's I guess it gets him out of the scene. And I think in terms of a relationship, Jet Li in his movies in this era tended to be very, almost like it was a schoolboyish kind of thing. If you look at the relationship in the Once Upon a Time in China movies, he's very uncomfortable around women. And here is actually, even though it is very tame by Western standards, it's a much more mature relationship in that there's obviously a certain degree of physicality between them. And then later he goes and lives in the wilderness with her, and they're sharing a hut. So one presumes that something is going on, which is relatively unusual. He doesn't kiss her. He doesn't have any big romantic scene. But it was unusual for this period. And here's gratitude for you. She has come in, she's testified, and she's saved their hero. What do these guys do? They throw her out on her ear. I mean, this is not the high point of the history of Zhengmomon. This is not a kind of a great day in the history of the Jingwu Academy, because they're proving here, and I think this is a very point well made by Gordon, that actually racism and jingoistic behavior, it can be on both sides of the tracks, that we've seen the Japanese are capable of it. Here we've seen the Chinese are as well. I mean, why don't they just take her, put her in pigtails in one of those little Mao outfits, and she can join the other girls? Because later they take in the hooker. They say, okay, you're a hooker, we don't mind that. You can come in and join us and, join the club. But you're Japanese. You have to go out on the street and, by the way, take your hero with you. So it's and also that's Pan Chi-ching's big close-up. I think it's her big close-up with the movie. Cute and as successful as a TVB actress, but not somebody who had a really long-standing career as a movie performer. So this actually gives extra spice to the by this point, I think we know there has to be some kind of duel between the Jet Li character and Chin Siu-ho to prove who is actually the master fighter, the main fighter of Jeng Mo-mun. And so this is kind of given a bit more spice by the fact that there's this clash over the woman. Not that they're after the same woman, but the fact that Chen Jun has chosen to have this relationship with a Japanese girl leads for this. It means that also in the fight, and I think this is a very nice human touch, is he's holding back. Chen Jun is holding back, and at a certain point looks back and sees the girl watching him, and like no one wants to lose in front of the girl. So see the stone in the background there? That's the stone logo of Jeng Mo-mun, of Jing Woo-men. And that's the same logo, that kind of shield on the wall. You see that in all the schools today. There's still one in Hong Kong. There are still many of them around the world. There's also, of course, in Shanghai they have one. Great Showdown. You see the characters of Jeng Mo-mun and the gold on black writing in the background. This is also the artwork, I think, for several of the DVD sleeves was Jet in this particular pose. And again, the initial encounter is like at striking range, and I sense that Chen Jun definitely is holding back to give face to the son of his teacher. And we get to see the power of Chin Siu-ho. But again, Chen Jun has taken everything that he's been taught and has adapted it to be specifically his own. So he has the capacity to take it like a step further. And a lot of use of acrobatics here, a few double shots for the flips, but again, not really ever getting into all the wire fu that we've seen in the other movies from this era that Jet Li was doing, the Once Upon a Time in China, the Fong Sai-yuk films. Much more grounded action. And here again, the use of distance. That Chin Siu-ho is doing this style, which is very much like southern fist and northern leg together at arm's reach. And once you get into this closer range, which is where Chen Jun is comfortable with fighting, he's at a disadvantage. So he's using distance as a weapon, and this is something that you see all the way through the movie. So this is a shot I'm talking about when he comes up and he looks back and he sees his lost face in front of his girl. And of course, no man can stand for that, so he's going to kind of take it up a couple of notches to fight back. But he kind of needs to be provoked. He's such a good-hearted guy. He needs that provocation for him to actually really kind of cut loose. Great shot there, looking down on Chin Siu-ho to show he's been momentarily defeated, and looking upward at Chen Jun. Now, what they have here, by way of Bruce Lee, by way of the Way of the Dragon fight with Chuck Norris, is this kind of Ali shuffle. I have to say, I never felt Jet looked completely comfortable with this, because obviously his background as a martial artist is very much in wushu. Though he has adapted that to do other styles of fighting, it still feels a little bit forced. But I totally, and also anachronistic. Boxers were not fighting this in 1937. But I think for the purposes of the film, what we're showing is that in his time in Japan, and through his own efforts, that Chen Jun has actually modified the martial art he was taught at Jeng Mo-mun, and he's using it. He's got his own system, his own style. Just then, when Chin Siu-ho is fighting, if you go back and look, he's kind of fighting out of a single whip, which is it's one Tai Chi movement that actually appears in all the Tai Chi forms, single whip, Dan Bin. And you really feel the impact of that blow. This movie, a big favourite of the Wachowski brothers, and you see so much of the Matrix, the good Matrix movie, the first one. So many movements from fights here show up in that film as well. It was a major influence on them. And they actually asked Jet Li to play a character in The Matrix 2 and 3, but he declined. So again, the backstory to why Chin Siu-ho has been weakened was that he was taking opium with his girlfriend, but this has been taken out from most versions of the film. So we don't really know why. So I think there's two things. One is that Chen Jun has kind of trained himself to another level, and also that Chin Siu-ho, his character, has kind of slipped from the true path because he's been tempted away by a woman and by opium. So, banished. Chen Jun is banished from the school, and now he's going to do these three. This is a kowtow, which is a particular kind of bow, deep respect. A beautiful shot there of the image of Fot Yun Gap, Ho Yun Jia, who's an amazing character in Chinese film history. The feeling was when they did Fist of Fury that the events of Ho Yun-ja's life were quite well known. So you had to kind of have a new character, Chen Jun, who you could actually kind of have more freedom to create a new story with. So they had it about the student rather than it be about the master. Now, this is actually in Beijing. This is the one scene that was shot in Beijing when they go into this hotel. The sign outside was Daijun Waloikun, big Chinese motel. And it's actually in Beijing. They wanted to find somewhere with a courtyard like this as an actual location. I don't know why Jet didn't think, you know what, I'm just going to put her in Chinese clothes and pigtails. And then nobody would know. But of course, as soon as she turns up wearing a hakama, everybody knows she's Japanese. And there's racism against Japanese as well. So Jet Li, I believe, is a Beijing native. So this is the one scene that he shot in Beijing. Though Tianjin is not far from Beijing. But and here we are back in Hong Kong. This is actually near Saigon, and kind of the setting, the environment that you'd see in the old Shaw Brothers movies. And if you look at the gravestone, it's got the name of Ho Yun-ja or Fot Yun-gap, and it's a Ho Yun-ja Simo, basically gravestone of Ho Yun-ja, Fot Yun-gap. Born 22nd of March, which means not that I believe in astrology, but apparently he was a Pisces. And according to the gravestone we see here, he died on the 14th of August. And in fact, historically, he's meant to have died on the 9th of August and in 1910. And this movie's set in 1937. So there's a certain anachronism there. But I think a movie set in 1910 has certain constraints in terms of what you can do with the Japanese and everything. So they kind of move the story upwards in history. And if you look at the gravestone, they actually have his years not in the Western calendar, but in the old Chinese calendar, because there was an older Chinese calendar by which years were measured. So you actually had the years of his life in the old Chinese version. And in Chinese tradition, in Feng Shui or Feng Shui, the position of a grave is very important, and the size of it is very important. So you see, when you actually see the grave of Ho Yun-ja, the grave site is massive, and it's positioned in this kind of valley, which I believe in Feng Shui, which is confluence of wind, water, air, and earth, will bring fortune to his successors. So it's very important. There's a whole movie actually that was done around about this time, A Golden Harvest, called Bury Me High by Choi Siu-ming, which is all about that, is where the positioning of people's graves affects the fortune of their ancestors. And you actually see Bruce Lee sitting by the grave of his master in Fist of Fury at night. There's a very different energy to that scene, but it's very important paying respect to the late master. Carol Tam, who we see here, she has done a couple of movies. She's primarily a TVB actress. She was in the wonderfully named movie Tough Beauty and the Sloppy Slop, starring Kung Fu idol Yuen Woo. I've always felt that was actually Sloppy Cop. I mean, not that that's much more of a sensible title, but that somebody actually wrote slop instead of cop, so it became Tough Beauty and the Sloppy Slop. But that was probably one of her few theatrical movie appearances. But I think she's very good here. Gordon got great performances out of the supporting cast, and Paul Chun, always great. And a veteran actor. You see him in the old days at Shaw Brothers, and he's really often working with Andy Lau Datwa, and constantly working as a character actor with I think in Hong Kong we're fortunate to have, from the Shaw Brothers era and from the TVB era, a lot of actors who've come up through the ranks and are really, fantastic screen actors looking for quality material like this. Guy in the middle is Gary Mack. He's actually a assistant director, but I don't think he was the assistant director on this film. He was just playing a role. So they bring in, the Chinese come in. Chan Yifai has this note with him, and it's Tiujin Shu, which is Tiujin is challenge, and Shu is it's a book really, but like Mohap Shu, like a swordsman novel. But here it's used the word Shu to mean like a letter. So it's letter of challenge, something that really also turns up in the later movie Fearless. Fearless, by the way, in Chinese is Ho Yun-ja or Fot Yun-ga, which is the character that Jet Li played in Fearless. So there's the Tiujin Shu, which is the challenge, an official challenge for Zheng Momun to send a fighter to fight against the Billy Chow character. And now we finally get another a subplot kind of resolved, which is who actually got to poison Fot Yun-gap, Ho Yun-ja. and how did they do it. This is actually another interior at Golden Harvest. This is the equivalent. There's a scene, the way this scene plays out in the Bruce Lee Fist of Fury is that he happens to be staying up at night and happens to overhear the guys talking in the kitchen, and he comes in and sees the fellas wearing this kind of like, Nipponese underwear, and he goes, "So you're Japanese?" And so it's like really just by luck that he finds out. And here we don't really find out until the end when it's revealed who the traitor is. So you get this kind of little dark subplot of the fact that they've blackmailed, they kind of coerced the cook into poisoning the great man. And now he's going to kind of spill the beans, so he has to be dealt with. It's very dark, and it's I think something that Gordon Chan, as a director, has a great facility on his best films of balancing elements of dark and light. That you get some lighter comedy moments, you get some more human moments of romance or feeling between people, and then you get the darker moments like this, the lighting from below that kind of really, it's almost horror movie lighting for this particular scene, as reflects the content of it, that he's decided he has to kill the old man and make it look like suicide. So there's the sign again for Zheng Momun, for those of you who are learning to write Chinese. And hanging is the falsely accused. He's the guy that did it, but he was killed because he was going to come out and spill the beans as to why this had happened. The police actually are much more effective in this movie as investigators than they are in the original Fist of Fury. And there's Wong Wah-wo in the middle there. Now, his background is he was a contemporary of the director Johnny To Ke-fong at TVB, and therefore constantly being used by Johnny To in all of the recent Johnny To movies, up to Mad Detective, which is, I think, Mad Detective and Sparrow, which just came out in Hong Kong as I record this. And so he's constantly working on those films. It's like the old TVB fellas club. So he's a member of that. But in the original Fist of Fury, the police basically just walk around trying and failing to find Bruce Lee, and they don't have any luck. And here, Yun Chen-yan's guys actually are doing some detective work and seem to be much more fair in the fact that they're investigating, the rights and wrongs of these people being killed in the Shanghai of this era. The character played by Yun Chen-yan here was played by Lo Wei, who directed the original Fist of Fury, and Lo Wei actually reprised that role in New Fist of Fury, which starred the very young Jackie Chan. And actually, the scenes with Lo Wei were cut from some versions of Fist of Fury, I think because of concerns about copyright, that it be perceived, because it wasn't made by Golden Harvest, that it be perceived as some kind of unofficial, illegal sequel. And again, nice shot there of the gateways of Ada Choi coming in. I worked with the production design of this movie is sublime, and I worked with Horace Ma on Dragon Squad, which we released on Dragon Dynasty's Dragon Heat, and he also did the movie Fight Back to School, which is a movie that Gordon Chan did with Stephen Chow Sing-chi. So you have this beautifully, and the character coming in, when she says her name and where she works, it's immediately apparent that she's like a lady of the evening. And being very uptight, middle-class Chinese people, they're really like, oh my God, and beyond that is like, okay, you're doing that for a living, and by the way, why is our young master hanging with you? And so you get the big revelation in this scene. This is an exterior in Tianjin. You see the street here. You see the lamp there on the left is actually a very similar lamp from Shanghai, is in the gardens of Jackie Chan's house, and I was lucky enough to visit there, and he gave me myself and Rob Minkoff, director of Forbidden Kingdom, the $10 tour, and he talked at great length about a lamp, and they're just like the lamps you see reflected at the back of this carriage. There were lamps in Shanghai, as there may have been in Tianjin, which were actually marking the dividing line between the different concessions, and there's only a certain number of them left. So Jackie, being Jackie, of course, bought one, brought it back to Hong Kong, and has it in the garden of his home in Kowloon Tong. And so I thought of that when I was watching the movie. There's actually, I think, a good choice to film exteriors in Tianjin. I don't know quite why Shanghai film studios were not available or were too expensive, but they decided to shoot here. But it's actually a very faithful recreation of Shanghai of the era. Notice these are actually Japanese people. From the clothing we know these are Japanese people who are beating up on Chin Soo-ho. And it's this it's an interesting era because you're just at the cusp of a new age. You have horse-drawn carriages, you have rickshaws, and you have motor cars. You have kung fu, and you have firearms. So it's like all the great westerns, many of the great samurai films. It's about the cusp, the changing of an age, and characters who are kind of the product of older ideals that are being challenged by a new order. And so that makes the film, I think, very interesting. And I think maybe audiences don't sit there analysing it in the way that I am now, but they feel something for the characters, that it's a world that's on the cusp of change. And I think those kind of films are always exciting and always interesting, rather than just going to an area or a place in history which has a very firmly established status quo. If you're like just on the turning of the tide, that's where the great drama lies. And this film certainly plays to that. Again, look at this. They got no problem with taking in the hoe, but they will not accept the Japanese girl. So not the finest hour for the Jengmomun, for the doorway to excellence in martial arts. A very poetic name for the school. I mean, Jengmo is like, Mo is like martial, Jeng is excellent, and Moon is the doorway. So it's not saying like martial arts school, Mo-gun. It's actually, this is the doorway. Once you step through this doorway, you aspire to excellence in the martial arts. But I think it's very accurate in the reflecting of the bias at the time. I think it's accurate that in this era, they would be more likely to take in the fallen woman and to turn her into, just one of the other girls at the school, rather than accept one of the enemy, who would be Japanese. And again, in the sequence that follows, we have the Chin Soo-ho in training to accept the challenge to fight Fujita, played by Billy Chow. And because of I guess it was perhaps for censorship reasons or for running time, but there was the decision taken that in most versions you actually never mention the fact that he and the girl had been taking opium. So there's no real reason why he's... but in the next sequence, it's actually very clear that in some way he's not on top form. And why is that? There's no rationale for it. I mean, other than, I suppose, the idea that he's been spending his nights drinking and carousing with his girl when he should have been training. But this is kind of revealed in this sequence when he's sparring with the guys. I mean, I'm really impressed by the clean... You see the very clean... And also that you have as the back still this kind of thing. Who is the great master of Jengmomun? Well, it's Chen Zhen. But no one wants to say that because he's the son of the master. That's a very Chinese thing. And of course, by the end of the movie, that relationship is reconciled. So it really is character through action and great drama. But I like the crisp movement. So boom, he takes smacked in the face, and the reason is because he's been weakened by his lifestyle and by drug taking. But we never reference that in the film, so it's just like. But they're obviously concerned because he's going to have the fight of his life, and he's not. Doesn't seem to be up to it. Gary Mack there in the middle. Gary, by the way, guy in the middle speaking just a moment ago, is the assistant director on Beast Cops. Recently was assistant director on the Jet Li film Warlords. So he's often playing like supporting roles in films. Just now you saw all these kind of wooden blocks, they're called pai in Chinese, and Karate's character putting his pai on the board showing he's arrived at this particular dojo. The name of the dojo, by the way, in Cantonese is Hat Lung Wei, Black Dragon Society. And you actually saw those little, the pai, the wooden boards, at the beginning of Fist of Fury with Bruce Lee. When he leaves the school, having beaten up all the Japanese, he slams his fist against all those little wooden signs. They're kind of, when you come in to train, you put that up there as like a sign that you're actually visiting that particular dojo, Japanese martial arts school. So you have a confrontation here really between, just as in Jengmomun, there's like the Paul Chen's character in conflict with Chin Soo-ho, in conflict with Chen Zhen. Here, Karate comes, and he's immediately in conflict with Fujita, played by Billy Chow, who represents a new kind of brutal, militaristic Japan. And the old traditions, the beneficial, spiritual and mental traditions of Japan are kind of personified in the film by Karate's character, who is called Funakoshi, which is a reference to Gichin Funakoshi, founder of modern karate, at least modern karate on the Japanese mainland, and the founder of Shotokan karate, which is probably the most prevalent style of Japanese martial arts. Now we're back out in Saigon, and I think it's really interesting particularly to bring karate, Yasuaki karate, out of the mist because he fought here before in this same area against Gordon Liu, Lao Garfai, in the movie Heroes of the East. He seems ageless. I mean, he was fighting in Legend of a Fighter, he was fighting in the Bruce Lee era, and here he is fighting again. So really, I think Karate-san shows the benefit of lifelong martial arts training. Because and to this day, he just did a movie a couple of years back called Yellow Dragon, which was shot in Japan. He's in the new Jackie Chan movie, The Shinjuku Incident, which is shot mainly in Japan. So he's extraordinary longevity and delivered some fantastic performances over the years. And I must say his performance here is one of my favorites, because he, as Gordon told me, he really put a lot of the philosophy of Bruce Lee. Some of it's already being espoused by Jet Li, but a lot of it also is from Karata, who, as I mentioned earlier, is an idea, I think, of what Bruce Lee would be like had he lived. A gentleman of these years. I mean, they're contemporary figures, so you could have had a Bruce Lee, would that Bruce Lee had lived and been able to make films. It would be fascinating to see what direction his career would have taken, and would he have been given roles like this. So in the front of the grave of Phot Yun Gap, they're going to square off. And you see here the application, as well as martial technique, of martial strategy, which is another important aspect of martial art. And then boom, breaks. And then Karate has the phrase that Bruce Lee uses in Enter the Dragon, boards don't hit back. So he's like saying, breaks, don't hit back. Now watch here, when he uses a very light skill of two fingers and cuts through that yellow charm. Those round charms with calligraphy writing on, they use to kind of bring benefit to the dead. Part of Taoist tradition, and you see them all over the grave area. But he's showing the lightness of touch that he's bringing to this. Karate-san actually has fought all the greats. I mean, he fought Richard Norton in Shanghai Express, he fought Jackie Chan and Sammo Hung in Twinkle Twinkle Lucky Stars, and he fought Bolo Young, and the great Bolo, in a couple of movies. And he's constantly, and he worked with Sonny Chiba in Japan. So I think literally a legend. I mean, fist of legend, Jet Li is the fist, and I think Karate-san is the legend. So it's a battle of philosophies, and what's happening is this is a duel where Karatas come not to defeat or to kill Chen Jun, but to teach him. And he's really much reprising a role that Kurosada-san played in an earlier film directed by Yuen Woo-ping for Seasonal, which is called Legend of a Fighter, which in Chinese was Phot Yun Gap, or Ho Yun Jia, just like the later Jet Li Fearless was just named after that character. And in that movie, you saw the young life of Phot Yun Gap, played by Yuen Woo-ping's brother, Yin Yat Cho, and you saw how he was not allowed to train by his father, how he had a tutor who's played by Karate-san, who disguised his prowess in martial arts and trained him to become the great hero that he would become. So Gordon Chan said he'd actually not seen that film and was not really aware of it, but he knew karate anyway from his Shaw Brothers performances, and so felt he'd be really good for this role. And he also played a very honorable ninja master in Heroes of the East, Zhonghua Zhengfu, which is the Shaw Brothers classic. Now, if you look here, there's actually because of the limitations on what you can do in this setting, they're actually using, if you freeze frame it, the blurring of the frame of the lens to disguise the wires and also some of the doubles. So you actually put Vaseline on the lens and you get kind of a blurring effect just there, because you could see very evidently that it was a double and it was not actually Karate-san. Now, Karate's an incredible martial artist, but obviously was slightly advanced in years from Jet, so you had to compensate for that in some way. So Yuen Woo-ping using his usual craftsmanship, but that's something that now, of course, you've got all this digital ability, and now not. In those days, you did not. You would just have whatever you could do in camera. So you have great kind of exchanges of technique, and again, all the fights kind of begin in this traditional Kyun-guk hand and foot motion, and then they kind of change range. Now, this is fun because, of course, we've seen Chen Jun has learnt this in Japan, and now his opponent has as well. So it's much more of an even match. And Funakoshi actually wins the duel at the end, but that's not his motive. He wants to teach Chen Jun to make Chen Jun more of a worthy instrument to kind of like fight for the honor of martial art rather than just for the honor of his nation. And I think that's a very important point that Gordon Chan was making, that martial art is like beyond nationality, that it's actually a spiritual practice, and there's something he wanted to bring across. So this is the kind of like interesting choice, the wind blowing up here. Almost like the spirit of Fot Yun Gap coming to the defense of his student, because the wind blows into the eyes of the Japanese fighter. Now, I remember when I was editing, or involved with the editing of another movie. There's a Sanchin kata move just then, when you bring the fists down in front of his body. Sanchin is like one of the basic katas of, or the key core katas of the Goju-kai karate style, which I think is a style that Karate-san had trained in his younger years. So here, obviously, the honor of Chen Jun, he realizes his opponent is at a disadvantage, so you're going to go into the next section of the fight. As I mentioned, I remember being in the editing rooms, editing another movie, I think it was High Voltage, and going into the next door. They were editing this movie next door, and going in, and the only bit I saw was this. And so, not knowing anything about the movie, I thought that Jet Li's character was blind and was like a Zatoichi kind of guy. So, what a surprise I had when I saw the full movie, but I just watched this sequence. This is something very much from inspired by Wing Chun, which is the kung fu style that Bruce Lee primarily trained in when he was in Hong Kong. They have a drill called Chi Sao, sticking hands, which is to develop speed and sensitivity. And at the higher level, you can actually blindfold yourself and like cross hands with your opponent and sense openings. And this is kind of an exaggerated version of that, but you can actually block a punch coming at you, and you can sense an opening and attack your opponent. So this is kind of playing on that. There's actually a very comedic version of this in the Sammo Hung film Warriors 2, where one of the guys is cheating. He keeps lifting the blindfold and punching the other guy. So getting into the final moments of it, and the battle at all ranges of combat, and I think this is one of the lessons that is being taught by Karate-san, and certainly was something that Bruce, well before MMA had achieved the notoriety it has today, Bruce Lee was coming in the beginning of Enter the Dragon and saying, you know what, you have to fight at every range of combat. And the opening scene between Bruce Lee and Sammo Hung in Enter the Dragon finishes up on the ground, just as this particular duel does. And so you kind of come to a kind of an on-pass. But I would say that in the final moments of the fight, that Funakoshi has the advantage, because what he does is when they actually go down to the ground a final time, he's coming in and able to apply a throat strike, which, you know, if he would have applied it full force, obviously a throat strike is a much more punishing technique than the leg lock, which is what Jet Li gets in. So once they get to the ground, it's like a it's kind of like it's perceived as a draw, but Jet gets up and then it's like, no, you know, you've won, and you've taught, and then realizes he's been taught a lesson. So they get here, boom, he comes in with the throat lock, which is like almost like a yin jiao, eagle claw movement, and then he pulls back, and that's the end of the fight. And from there, there's this kind of moment of, the Japanese call it satori, which is enlightenment, which is the enlightenment for Chen Jun, which is the true nature of martial arts. It's revealed for him through combat. And there's a line I really love when he's been listening to Karate-san talking, and Funakoshi-san talking, and he says, I knew that Master Funakoshi was a master of martial art. I didn't realize he was a spiritual master as well, that he was a master of cultivation, that he, as a human being, how you cultivate yourself as a human being. So he's teaching him a lesson that transcends nations and also transcends martial arts. And considering the spiritual nature of martial art practice, how few martial art movies make even a lip service or a token attempt to convey these ideas. And I think that's why people love this movie so much, that they feel that it has really got something for body, mind and spirit. You know, inspires you to train in martial art. It's got a smart story and strong characters, and if you're interested in that kind of thing, it does use these characters to convey some of the spiritual aspects. One thing that I think is an error in the film, and I must raise it with Gordon in due course. This is the great send-off for Karate-san from the movie. This is what his last shot should have been, which is his kind of like, his character came in out of the mist in that wonderful shot, and then when he walks away, he's singing to himself a Japanese folk song, and he walks off like into legend. And I think it's great when you have a character as powerful as Kurosata's character in this movie. The way you bring him in and the way you take him out is really important. For various reasons, they decided to depart from that for the final edit of the film. And there's another scene which is coming up, which to me feels a little bit like a reshoot. It feels like a scene that's been stuck into the film for extraneous purposes. But this should be the last shot of Kurata from the film, when he kind of is limping slightly and he walks away into the distance. And then you have this scene where they're talking politics, and I mean, who cares, frankly? It's not as powerful. But what Gordon Chan wanted to do was to show even further the contrasting views of the Japanese about the political situation. And he felt he hadn't done that sufficiently, so he came up with this scene of them playing Go. If you look, also there's a continuity error. It's one of the few major continuity errors in the movie. If you watch carefully, that Funakoshi, Kurata-san's character, has a whole pile of the white Go kind of discs in front of him, and they're actually missing between a couple of shots. What I suspect is they were actually playing Go between takes, which is always bad when you have food on the table or when you have like a chess game, because people will move the stuff around because they're bored between takes, and it's hell doing the continuity, especially when, as on Hong Kong movies, you normally don't have a continuity woman. So if you watch, there's none there. There's like just a couple. And then when you come into a tighter shot, by the way, I readily admit this is the kind of thing only a nerd like me who's watched the film too many times would notice. You actually see a big pile of these of them, which has come back. There's none there, and then later when he comes back and you come into a tighter shot on Kurata-san, they've come back. So not only is this scene boring as all buggery, but it's actually got continuity errors as well. So for all the abuse we take for, or that the company used to take for cutting films, I would actually feel that this is a scene you could happily cut from the movie and nobody would miss. Also, I didn't feel that the other actor, not Kurata-san, who's fantastic, I didn't feel the other actor was particularly strong in the film. So that was my small issue with it. So anyway, you had a fantastic role from Kurata-san, and if you're interested to see his development, you should go back and look at Legend of a Fighter from seasonal films, when he's playing as a much younger man, playing a similar version of this character, and it's interesting to watch. Now we're back out in Saigon, and shooting nightfall for nightfall, and then shooting night for night. The reason I mention this is that in the old Shaw Brothers era, they would hardly ever shoot night for night. They would shoot night scenes using not particularly convincing blue filters, so it was all shot in daylight because of the expense of bringing out lights into the countryside. But by the time of this movie, they'd actually moved ahead in terms of shooting and lighting Hong Kong movies that you could actually light scenes for night. I want to mention the DP of the movie, Derek Wan, because I think he's done a fantastic job. This is one of the best-looking martial art movies ever, but certainly one of the best of its era. And for some reason, sometimes you get somebody who performs really at the top of their game and does a fantastic piece of work, and for some reason is never quite at that level again. And I think you could make that case with Derek Wan. He went off to work for the producer Yuen at Seasonal Films, and he shot a couple of films, Super Fights and Blood Moon. These were English language movies produced by a Hong Kong company, like straight-to-video titles that were not particularly amazing. And he also did a movie for Emperor, when I was working at the Emperor company, called Manhattan Midnight, starring my comrade in arms, Maggie Q. And that was actually one of the very first movies shot on HD, and it's not a great film, but it's a nice enough looking movie. But to date, Derek Wan hasn't shot anything that looks anywhere near as great as Fist of Legend. This is a really nice sequence, and I want to mention the lighting, because it's very tricky when you're lighting at night. You've got to kind of explain where is the light coming from. So they have the fire, but the nice thing about it is you don't see like a little spot underneath each of them, like the little light kind of illuminating them as if they're sitting, in the front seat of a car with like the car dashboard lights up on them. It's like that you do get the sense of this very warm lighting that you would have from the fire. So it's very realistic, and these little touches to me that really make the film, and also the comradeship, the kind of this is the reconciliation between these two brothers, not blood brothers, but like brothers from the same martial arts tradition. And in this movie, what we get to see in this scene is a juxtaposition of the physical technique of Chin Soo-ho and the physical technique of Jet Li. The Mai Jong-kun, which is performed by initially by Chin Soo-ho and then kind of like copied, and there's a kind of this Star Wars wipe where you get Jet Li doing it, is actually the style that was made famous by Fo Yun-ga or Ho Yun-ja. And there's a representation of it in the end of the Bruce Lee Fist of Fury when he's kind of waving his arms in slow motion. They very wisely decided not to try to replicate that. They did that with the Jackie Chan movie New Fist of Fury, and it's laughable. Only Bruce Lee could get away with it. So here it's a very different interpretation. But if you go back and look, there's kind of a wipe between the two, which is, again, not an editing technique that you saw a lot in the films of this era. So a lot of nice little touches. Editor of the movie, Chan Ki-hop, an old friend of mine. I worked with him on The Medallion and also The Twins Effect, which were pictures that he edited, and editors in Hong Kong definitely edit as we go. See the light in the sky? This is what you always get with a night shoot. You get those last couple of shots. And Chin Soo-ho is the smallest star, so he had to kind of stick around to the very end. So you got like the sky is just lightning behind him, and it's still pretty black behind Jet. So they wrapped Jet early, he took off, and then they would have got Chin Soo-ho's reverse shots of that. This is very much in the tradition of Chang Che, Jung-ji, the old Shaw Brothers director, that the girl needs to leave so the guys can get on with the final fight. I mean, in the movies of Jung-ji, who is somebody that Gordon Chan had known at Shaw Brothers, girls are always a nuisance. They're in the way of the brothers. You know, like if anybody gets killed, it's because of a girl. And in the Duk Bae-do, One-Armed Swordsman, Wong Yu's arm is chopped off because of a girl. So here, Miss Nakayama has to leave the fray so we can set the final fight. Now here's Billy Chow recreating the kind of demonstration that Bob Baker, Bruce Lee's American student, performed in Fist of Fury. And so I actually played the Bob Baker role in the TV series Fist of Fury that starred Donnie Yen as Chen Jun. But I never got to do this stuff. I was kind of bummed about that. I would love to have hammered some nails into the wood. Of course, with my Fist of Fury, I wouldn't need fake rocks. That'd be the real deal. But they really set up Billy as a killing machine in this sequence, and I think that's really smart, because by this point we've seen Jet Li in action and we've seen Chin Soo-ho in action, and we know those guys have great, but the door opener, the deities there are Moon-san, door saints, and so you get the deities on the door for good fortune. Costumes of the film by Chan Ku-fong, Shirley Chan. She won the Golden Horse Award for Kung Fu Hustle, Stephen Chow movie. She did the costumes for that. Also did costumes for Seven Swords with Donnie Yen and Forbidden Kingdom, which was with Jet Li and Jackie Chan. But I've just mentioned that here because I thought this was a wonderful array of period costumes in the doorway of the martial arts school. So from there, this little beat there of Jet coming in. Notice he's back in the black traditional outfit he's wearing at the beginning of the film. It's an interesting choice because that is the uniform of a Japanese student. So it's curious that he's chosen that particular outfit to go for the final duel with the Japanese. Back at the dojo, the Japanese in the movie, there's a mix. There's like Billy Chow is Chinese from Canada. Does not, as far as I know, speak Japanese particularly well, but he had a good look. I think he's like, they really made him look like the Frankenstein of Japanese karate masters for this film. And he's like totally a great representation of the brutal Japanese military might of the late 30s and early 40s. Some of the other actors in the background who have a Japanese appearance are actually Chinese actors playing Japanese. Dojo looks amazing. This actually was a big inspiration for the dojo set that you saw in the first Matrix. And again, the Wachowski brothers had seen this film ad infinitum, so they decided to recreate the set for that film. Now here's an example of tying up a plot point that everybody had forgotten about and nobody really cared about. You kind of want to see the traitor is dragged in, basically just to make sure he gets killed. And there's no other reason to see him in this scene. And I think most of the audience, certainly me by this point, I wanted to watch Jet Li fight Billy Chow. I could care less about the guy who was the traitor to the school. But I guess you needed to have that resolved, and so he gets his comeuppance. Bang. Now, this is kind of a restructuring of the narrative, because in the original film, they only established the Japanese with rifles surrounding the setting for the final showdown at the very end of the film. And here we set up the fact that this is almost like a military compound now. The soldiers have actually surrounded it. And here's the sign, which in the original film, Fist of Fury, it says Dongma Beng Fu, Sick Men of Asia. It's delivered to the funeral of Fort Yun Gap. But here, we only see it right at the very end. And this was something that the Japanese used, a derogatory phrase, the Japanese used to describe the Chinese, sadly, during this era. And when, in the original Fist of Fury, when in the Queen's Theatre, Bruce Lee beat up the Japanese and smashed the sign saying, "Now you know, we are not sick men," the whole place went up. They were like cheering, and it was Chinese patriotism and Hong Kong patriotism. So here, really playing on that. Now, it's interesting that there's actually, just as it has been with the character Wong Fei Hong, there's kind of a mythology now of Zheng Momun. I mean, it was the film that really established the characters was the Bruce Lee movie, Fist of Fury, when you actually met Chen Jun and you found out Chen Jun is from the school and what is Zheng Momun and that his master is Fort Yun Gap. They see the wire here for the sign so that Jet can kick it. So that's one of the uses of a wire in the movie. And you had that movie kind of establish the characters and the fact that there was a character called Ho Yun Ja. And that inspired a couple of like those sequels I mentioned with the Bruce Lee character, the imitator of Bruce Lee, and used some of the actors from the original film. And there was an official sequel, New Fist of Fury, in which Jackie Chan plays not Chen Jun, but a character inspired by Chen Jun. And it's a very powerful, very potent Chinese hero. And was also played round about the time that this movie was being done. Donnie Yen was shooting a TV series called Fist of Fury, in which he played Chen Jun, and I was actually in the movie playing the Bob Baker character, the Russian, in that. Fort Yun Gap, the teacher, was played by Jet Li in Fearless, and years earlier by the brother of Yuen Woo-ping in Legend of a Fighter. So this movie can be seen as being in the middle of a tradition of Fist of Fury movies, or Fist of it's like I guess you call it the Fist series, because they always seem to have that in the title, Fist of Fury, Fist of Legend. This fight sequence begins, like the others, at this kind of really punishing range of like a striking range. I mean, what you would call it, if you're looking at the terminology of Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune Do, where you had different ranges of combat, and the reality is a martial artist should be able to excel at every range of combat. Here, really, they start off at striking range. This is probably the range of combat with which Billy Chow is most familiar, because he came into it from a Thai boxing background. So he's very strong, physically very strong. And this is the kind of kicking and punching he would do in the ring. He's not so much somebody with the softer kung fu influence that Jet Li has. So this is the juxtaposition of these two styles. But physically, even without martial art. Now, the blood coming down, that's interesting. There was a comedic version of Fist of Fury called Fist of Fury 1991, starring Stephen Chow, where he fights a Japanese guy and has a similar injury and bleeds from the forehead. And for some odd reason, when I see that scene, now that's used again using a distance. The fist comes in and then the fingers extend to flick the eyes, so it's using distance in an unexpected way. Out into the garden. This again is a nod to Fist of Fury, where they had a fight in a Japanese garden, much like this one, and really still working on the basis of brute force. And whereas for most of the rest of the film there's a kind of a philosophy to the reason that Chen Jun wins, this one I think is more a film that the fight that his spirit wins, that he actually wins by being indomitable and literally refusing to say die, refusing to be beaten. And he really proves himself to be a physical match for Fujita, but more importantly, he's spiritually superior in that he has, like, a strength of purpose. Beautifully shot. I mean, the production design, the lighting, again, very familiar. I think very similar to some of the production design choices from Mishima. The scene when the shot when it's coming up, we have him dislocating his shoulder. I always wondered if that was something that they'd noticed happening in the Lethal Weapon movies. Lethal Weapon 1, I think it is, that we first learn that Mel Gibson has this dodgy shoulder that gets dislocated, but they actually have the shoulder dislocated in this sequence. Now, if anybody's ever had a dislocated shoulder, you would know you would not want to be rolling around or being hit while you had a dislocated shoulder, and you certainly, having popped it in, would not be ready to go 4 more rounds with the champ. But hey, it's only a movie. He's still wearing the white socks. Somebody tell him, please. But you notice Billy Chow is a martial arts guy, not a stuntman per se. So there is actually one of the reveals here. If you actually watch, every time Fujita hits the ground, there's like longer hair on the stuntman. This is the tactical thing. If you look, he blinked from the blood, and that was the moment that Chen Jun tried to attack, but didn't necessarily, did not quite work out. If you look in the background, you see the buckets there. They're actually used in a Japanese tea house, and would also be used to clean the dojo, which the junior students would do after every training session. So really creative. Look at the ceiling, very much in evidence. All the way through the film, Gordon made a decision that he was going to have this quite claustrophobic idea of you could see the ceilings in every building, in every set, which is something, as I mentioned before, you would never get that normally on a kung fu movie because you need space for the wires. So the reason you're not seeing a lot of wire effect, the Yuen Woo-ping couldn't do wire stuff because there wasn't room for the rigging. You could do wires side to side, but you couldn't do them up and down, which meant nobody could fly. Boom, puts that in. Ouch. And people, I guess, have to accept, the heightened reality of a martial art movie, that he could continue fighting having just done that. I love there's a movement, if you freeze frame, he just puts his hand out in the face as like a feint to his enemy, which I think is really cool. So, again, a fight that defies logic in many ways, but one in which we really see the indomitable spirit of Chen Jun. Now, this was the finishing move when Bruce Lee fought Chi Hon-soi in Game of Death, and here Chen Jun has a counter, so you go down to the throat. If you watch carefully, every time Billy Chow, understandably, if you've ever been thrown down into a wooden floor, you don't like doing it too many times, let the stunt guys do it. So as a stuntman, every time you slam the guy into the floor, whether it's Jet or Billy Chow, it's a stuntman. Actually, Billy had a pad. You can see quite evidently there's a pad in the front of his jacket there for the scene when Jet Li's really wailing on him at close range. And here, at this point of the fight, it ceases to be about technique as much as about spirit. It's like, who is the better man? Who is the deeper man? And so you have that idea expressed. For much of the rest of the film, it was about technique, and here it's really about, who's going to be the last man standing, because the spirit is stronger than the body. So, and Jet really, I think this is the great fight of Jet Li's career. In terms of ranges of combat and sheer ferocity. Certainly in Bruce Lee's movies, Bruce Lee's interpretation of Chen Jun, he was never challenged the way that Jet Li is here. He never had to dig as deep. Bruce Lee was always at the beginning of the movie. He was a martial arts superhero, and the fun of the film is how he beat all comers, how he beat all his opponents. Maybe when he fought Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in Game of Death, there was a bit of a challenge like we see here, but generally not. Boom, up there, very kind of wushu-esque finishing move from Jet. And he's setting up the sword there for the next, what will be kind of the climactic scene of the film. And this shows how much Hong Kong cinema advanced, because back in the 70s, there's no way you would leave the guy responsible for your teacher's death alive. But here, he's more concerned about his injured comrade than he is about killing Fujita, which I think shows that he's spiritually developed as well as being a master martial artist. So pulling the katana, and then putting these guys, this last moment when it's like, you really do feel that these guys are in danger, which is neat, because you've had a lot of action so far. To really pull this out the last moment is quite an accomplishment. And where you kind of expect them to pull out the Bruce Lee nunchakus, they decided very wisely to go another direction. He's using the belt, which is much more in keeping with Jet style, I think, more wushu style. He actually also used a belt to fight in the finale of the film Hitman, on which Gordon Chan, the director of this film, was a producer. So maybe that's like a trademark of Gordon Chan. He likes to whip people with a belt. There's a very wushu-y movement there as he did that kind of aerial technique. And so, leading up to the big finish, I think it was a smart choice not to have Jet playing with the nunchakus of the Sung Ji Quan. Great final image. Boom. And now they kind of have to rework the ending of Fist of Fury, which was the Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid finish, which is, here's the guy, he's committed all these murders, and in order for the school to be saved, he has to sacrifice himself. So there's a sense here that they're going to have that same dialogue, where is Chen Zhen going to be sacrificed for the future of the Chinese, for the future of Zheng Momon. So an ambassador comes in, and it's kind of like a kind of this big, great comedic entrance. That's probably the best entrance that Yun Chen-yan is ever going to get in his career. So he comes charging in. And the great thing about the fact they were shooting this on in the studios was the fact that you could get everybody very readily onto the same location for this climactic kind of Mexican standoff or Chinese standoff. Of course, in the days of Bruce Lee, and Bruce Lee's persona was such that you could do that big heroic death leap, and it was worked in the context of the film. This guy's so over the top. I mean, if he was any higher, he'd be an NBA player. But the thing was with Jet Li's character, obviously, you've been on a different journey, and I think it would be a huge downer for the audience if you kill the guy off at the end of the film. So they made a decision to go the way they went with it. But they set the whole thing up. You know, we're going to have the appearance of the sacrifice of this character. And that actually serves two functions. One is it makes him a martyr to the cause, so that it's actually in the benefit of the Chinese people. But also, he then becomes like a secret weapon fighting the Japanese on behalf of the Chinese underground. And that's the movie I would like to have seen. I would have rather seen that than Romeo Must Die or War or Cradle to Grave. I would rather have seen Jet Li come back and do a sequel to Fist of Legend. But Fist of Legend didn't make that much money in Asia, as much as had been expected, so there was no sequel. But I think a lot of people out there wanted... There is actually an awful movie out there called Fist of Legend 2, but it has nothing to do with this one. But I think everybody would love to see a sequel in which Chen Zhen played like a guerrilla fighter fighting the Japanese oppressors in like 1940s China. That would have been a great film. Hey, you know what? He may yet make it. Nice fade out, and then leaving... I guess if you're really gullible, you might think that they shot our hero, but no. And here we are back at Tianjin for this for the scene here where the body of somebody is coming out. And I suspect they actually put the body of the traitor in there to kind of, you know, to have a body that they could bring out that's meant to be Chen Zhen. And then back onto the streets of supposedly of Shanghai. This I didn't really get the rationale behind this, that even though he's sacrificed, they're actually closing up the place. And little walk on there from your usual Western bad guy. Been me in a few films, but not in this one. So this kind of like sets up the fact that we're gonna for these few beats of the film, I guess audiences who are willing to suspend their disbelief really believe they've killed off Jet Li. This is, by the way, the same rickshaw puller we saw at the beginning of the movie, who was skeptical about the status of Zheng Momon, who's now telling all his fellow coolies, hey guys, you know, it's the best. Now this is interesting. You see Jet coming back into the car, and I believe Jet is planning to do like a period Chinese Godfather movie, and I think this look is very much akin to what he might be wearing in that film. So this is kind of maybe a foretaste of an upcoming Jet Li movie, like a period gangster film, a Chinese Godfather. Car is slightly anachronistic, but I got told that by somebody else because I'm so not an expert on cars. So there you have it, folks. Many of the time you kind of are pitching and selling stuff and saying it's a masterpiece. Fist of Legend, unquestionably a masterpiece in the genre of martial arts filmmaking. Wonderful combination of very strong narrative, great characters, fantastic martial arts scene, great production values, and everybody at the top of their game. I don't think Jet Li, Gordon Chan, Chin Siu Ho, many of the participants have made better films. Yuen Woo-ping has consistently done excellent martial arts choreography, but for many of the people involved, this is really a chance to see them really at the top of their game. And I'm really proud that we can give it a reissue in America for a new audience on DVD, and they can actually appreciate. It's really an influential film. A lot of the American fight choreographers, the Wachowski brothers, and people working in America are very much inspired by Hong Kong films, and this is definitely a movie that had an inordinate effect on the way that choreography has been shaped in Hollywood action films of recent vintage. So you can actually go upriver and see it. And also it's part of a kind of a subculture of Hong Kong cinema, which is the Fist of Fury or the Chen Jun or Zheng Momun series of films. And so I'm particularly happy to be able to... There's my colleague Shannon McIntosh getting a credit. That's so cool. And this was a movie where, in retrospect, it would have been fantastic if the company at that time had been able to give the film a theatrical release, because I think it definitely, looking at the success that Fearless enjoyed, which was kind of cut from the same cloth, this is a film that I think definitely could have found a theatrical audience in the US. But anyway, here we have a DVD, and it's my privilege as the kind of the voice of Dragon Dynasty to bring you this commentary, these few insights into Fist of Legend. This is Bey Logan signing off. Joy Gin, Jai Jen, sayonara, and goodbye.